Hi, everyone. My name is John Faulkner, and I'm your host of the Smarter Systems, Better Care podcast. And I'm here with Dr. Bhandari. She's the founder of Thymos Health, and she shares how integrative medicine is reshaping the future of healthcare and empowering patients with personalized solutions. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, John. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. And then just to give our listeners context to start us off, tell us a bit about your background.
Well, I'm a board-certified family physician who's been practicing clinical medicine for the last 20 years. I shifted to integrative functional medicine more than a decade ago, and the birth of that happened after launching the first accountable care organization in San Francisco, recognizing that we still are a bit away from how we're going to create systems that both empower patients and providers equally to drive equitable, affordable business models where all of us can thrive. That led to me building the largest private integrative functional medical center in San Francisco and recognizing that it is possible for everybody involved to actually create a model that works. That's now leading to the launch of Thymos Health, which is the first proven virtual care service that can diagnose and treat 150 autoimmune disorders at scale.
That's amazing accomplishment. How long did it take you to develop that kind of technology, just out of curiosity?
We are still actively building out the technology in terms of the patient-facing apps and the provider platform. It has taken me probably more than 10 years of understanding the root cause of these complex, common, and rare conditions where when we do not address them early on, more than half will advance to cancers and severe multi-organ damage, and that 80% of the cases are women. And so I've built out hundreds of proprietary algorithms, which takes a whole person view. And then I've run studies both within my center and then an independent company where we needed to showcase, can we drive the results at scale by empowering predominantly nurse practitioners to provide this service? And what we've shown is that we drive an 80% reduction in symptoms within 3 months and decrease the total healthcare cost by 80% in 1 year.
Wow, that's
So
amazing.
now,
Yeah.
now we're actually, I think the world is in a beautiful place where we can use Agentics AI to actually scale 90% of the clinicians' data analyses.
That's fantastic. And then, which stage of your funding are you at now? Like, where are you at in your business?
So we have bootstrapped everything that we've done, and we're now raising a case safe note so that we can finish building out the patient-facing app, the provider platform, hire the clinical team, build partnerships with payers and provider groups, because we're finding that what Thymos can do is very attractive to payers, providers, employers, because we are able to build a scalable, high ROI solution that is going to address millions of lives in underserved regions which do not have access to specialists. Care is fragmented, episodic, and it's not working. So that's, our goal is that we would be able to launch our service in Q1 of 2026.
So,
Correct.
yeah. And what's the core focus of your business right now? It sounds like you're, getting a lot of funding coming up, which is great. Kind of push things over the finish line. So, and then how do you serve your clients? It sounds like you're kind of thinking like payers. What does that kind of model look like?
Where our customers are, because we've already completed a direct-to-consumer beta, that we've been able to really refine our models and how we can build out the technology. So for right now, we're working on 3 pilots with an ACO, an MSO, and a self-insured employer where they collectively cover 900,000 lives. And so what we're doing is that their cost on average, the first year of an autoimmune patient is around $67K. We will bring that down to $11K, which will, if otherwise, the cost is just going to go up every year for payers. Patients are going to need many more specialists involved. There are many more drugs involved, and they're still going to deal with probably quarterly ER visits. So what we're able to do is decrease the polypharmacy, the ER visits, the over-testing, and the need for so many specialists involved with each patient, where we're driving faster, more precise diagnoses, a whole person care. We're incorporating the psychology, emotions, physical and epigenetic data in real time. And patients are getting daily AI health coaching. They're understanding what their data is meaning, what their data means, and scaling the clinician visits. To think from the lens of our customers have to be empowered providers that can serve a critical role in the communication, overseeing everything that we're doing, and also patients. And at the same time, we've got to be able to drive results where the payers are seeing the value, which allows us to scale from not just starting in California, but going quickly to many states. And then being cash flow positive would actually allow us to keep expanding our service.
Yeah, absolutely. You're definitely found something like very specific, and it was really telling too. You said this affects mostly women too. These autoimmune disorders that you found through your work. Is that correct?
Yeah, so it started with a personal journey because when I was 28, I developed an autoimmune thyroiditis and left untreated, and progressed quickly into a rare life threatening breast cancer. And then 5 years later, our oldest daughter, Maya, developed autoimmune induced ovarian tumor that has caused infertility. And our younger daughter, Zara, developed an autoimmune urticaria, where the recommended standard of care treatments increased her lifetime risk of cancer. And what really started as a mission to find anything that would reverse my children's condition has taken me on this 15-year journey, where I've successfully treated over 5,000 patients with rare and common autoimmune disorders, driving a 5 times better health outcome than the competition. And so it's really that we need to serve the fact that yes, women are increasingly at a higher rate. The prevalence of various autoimmune disorders and their cost is increasing at 19% annually. And we don't really have any effective solutions in conventional medicine because it's not just one test, it's not just the drugs, because more than 2/3 of patients don't even respond. And a simple way to think about it is that middle world where a patient's getting sicker, but we're not really designed to do longitudinal proactive service. And so what happens is that we may be mitigating symptoms, and the maximum patients experience is like 50% in a traditional system, but that is not addressing the root cause of their issues. And so they're getting sicker and sicker. We're seeing more of this rising in pregnancy. And so it's fundamentally changing the genetic code and the expression of the fetus. And so a big part of it is the integration of a deeper understanding on the microbiome, which right when you're born, you are exposed to all these beautiful bacteria, both in the mother's vaginal canal and on the skin. And so that serves like 85% of your immune system. And so when that microbiome is increasingly not as healthy, it directly accelerates both how fast are cells dying, how much inflammation is there running, both in the bloodstream and in the brain. And that completely shifts from an early age how a person is going to react to either perceived and real threats. And that vicious cycle creates what we call like a fight or flight response, where a person is basically getting sicker, but they don't know it in a way until there's a big alarm that goes off that there's physical signs. But when we oftentimes don't understand what's happening from a whole body system, then things get worse. People kind of learn to cope, but disease keeps progressing. And we're seeing this increasingly where we have diseases such as like type 1 diabetes, allergies, asthma, eczema, even like many cancers, cardiovascular complications that are happening earlier and earlier in people's lives that even like probably 50 years ago we never saw at this rate.
Wow. Yeah, it sounds like definitely a personal story connection from what you've described. And I can see that why that would be driving you for this many years. Like, is you need something like that to keep you going because it's a lot of work, a lot of effort, a lot of long hours, I'm sure, to get to where you're at. So congrats on that. And then looking at like a big shift, like in the industry as a whole with like autoimmune disorders, even women's health, what are some things that most leaders are not paying enough attention to?
They are still focusing on a one size fits solution. It's still pretty reactive. It's still looking at it's still looking at um, looking at like reductive way of how we take a symptom and say, let's mitigate that symptom from like a general population perspective. But there is a fundamental difference between gender biases or fragmented care system. And I think the other thing is that when we look at the data sets, they still have a high load of cognitive biases where those data sets may be predominantly from hospital systems. And so in that sense, is it really truly like a very unbiased science evidence-based approach where when we don't really look at all these different elements, like from the microbiome to cells in the ecosystem of their organs and how they're functioning in the context of many psychosocial variables, we're going to miss the dot. And so we still are continuing to create solutions that have a reductive approach where we say, oh, it's just your hormones and this one pill is going to make it better. When you really look at the macro view, we've not really driven those results. We're still using the same solutions, but relabeling it. And you wonder, when we've spent trillions of dollars on cancer research, it does not translate to the clinical practice. And the other key thing is we have to recognize that we have been financially incentivized in the US to not really fix problems. And so I think it's important to take in regard that we're at a tipping point and have been at a tipping point. And probably most of us have a personal story of even within ourselves or our family or people that we're close to. And I think that storyline is changing, that there's more value that employers, value-based providers, and organizations are saying, we've got to change things. And so they're willing to actually invest where maybe before we wouldn't have.
Yeah. And that sounds like because they're listening to the innovation, the things that you're opening their eyes to, that they, like you said, you can't do the same model for everybody at this macro view. It's just not going to work, unfortunately. And, what do you think is going to happen if businesses ignore that shift?
It's costing us billions of dollars. I mean, right
Yeah.
now, the direct cost of autoimmune disorders is $200 billion annually.
Wow,
This
that
is going
high.
to increase. Yeah. That's just the direct cost. And so it's becoming one of the most deadliest conditions out there. And it's just going to keep getting worse and worse and worse, and not just in the US, but even worldwide. And so I think from that lens, we're getting bankrupt from not shifting to a more whole person, longitudinal, proactive approach. But it's really difficult because our healthcare system hasn't been designed that way. And so I think you have to be able to drive the results very fast, show that you have a scalable, high ROI model that can work for everyone involved.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what it comes down to. Because if it's great ROI, then you can connect the dots not only with the payers, with the patients, and like everyone wins in that model. If you think about it, some people might have the insight of like, oh, it's just about the money. It's really not. It's just that the money is the driving force for innovation and making sure things are happening in the healthcare system that people probably lost a lot of confidence in, unfortunately. So that's how the changes occur.
Mhm.
And when you look at even closer to your own business, looking at operations day to day, do things feel clunky at all or slower than you would like to see? Curious on your thoughts.
They are really clinky because the way we've really brought technology into healthcare has been more on the periphery, on the administrative side, but it doesn't really touch the actual interpretation of data that is still heavily biased on humans serving that loop. And just take one example of, we run blood tests like thousands and thousands every single second, and that interpretation is still heavily human dependent. But the probability of a human making an error is really high, especially when we're trained to break the human body into into separate systems where you have to be able to connect the dots and understand the root cause. And so with that lens, the probability of narrowing it down to say, okay, I see the issue is A, B, and C, well, you're probably going to miss a large percentage of the underlying issues. And so disease gets progressed in much later stages. And the focus has also been in allopathic medicine just to mitigate symptoms. But the solutions that are being offered tend to be very side effect ridden drugs, invasive solutions, and they don't really change that dial very effectively. And so I think times are changing where technology can possibly automate a large percent of that clinician analyses and allow that clinician to focus in on the communication and the oversight of the safety. Those are two factors that are really missing in our current system, where we don't feel heard. We don't necessarily even trust the others. And not just in healthcare, but in general. I think humans feel more comfortable communicating with technology when there's not a human in the loop, because we immediately feel judged. And so if you can create a model that allows the human provider to feel safe themselves to connect with someone, have the guardrails set up, and have the support network where they're not really, everything doesn't fall in the line with them. like figuring out what's going on, providing the care, driving the results. It's just not possible. So you need a system that is much more comprehensive where we recognize that if you bring in, let's say, AI health coaching and you're able to engage with that every single day, consumers are much more comfortable with that. But the second a human comes in the loop, the human has to serve a very critical purpose that really empowers them both to go on a journey
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
really discover that disease does not need to be static. We're not static. We're always changing. And what was does not need to define our future, but we do need to kind of turn it upside down where if you recognize that big, massive catastrophe is right there in the periphery, that the cancer is growing, there is cardiovascular disease, that from that lens, you can meet someone where you are and you can objectively recognize we do have a responsibility to change that. Because none of this major catastrophes, they don't happen overnight. They take
No.
decades. And I think from that lens, when the data interpretation is more evident and you're like, oh, wow, I see that when I change these certain aspects of my lifestyle, I changed how I was thinking, how I was speaking. It drives the results very efficiently.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good call out on the human aspect is like, and that's even going to like chat GBT or these other large language models where people may have more comfort actually not being judged, just openly communicating with them, getting feedback and brainstorming. That's an interesting take on that as well. And then like, what's working really well at Thymos Health right now that you would just not be able to live without?
Well, again, we're still building out the platform, so we're not yet seeing patients. I think what is working well is it surprised me how technology is allowing us to do what we're doing as fast as we are because, I have been actively working on all of the algorithms for years, but our team officially came together over a year, our founding team a year ago, and we are able to move as fast as we are because we're bridging where technology is constantly, just every month, it's getting better and better and better. So I think that would not have been possible even like a year ago. So I think that part I find is very exciting in terms of bridging the science side, where a lot of work I've done, but it can't come to life without bridging all these different players. So I think that's one aspect. I also say that there's been a lot of interest in what we're doing, but at the same time, what has been challenging is the market is tough right now to raise capital. There's a lot of other external factors. And so what used to be like more of like having already proved this out, now you need to actually be much further along in development in terms of technology is still and healthcare is still focused on like products. There's been less investment on the service side because I think a lot of investors have gotten burnt over the last many years. So, it's a tricky situation where I think I was a bit surprised on that, sadly enough, but at the same time, I believe that when you're building super lean, you actually have a macro view to the reasons why, and it allows you to keep improving your service. Whereas maybe before would have thought of your minimal viable product with a lot more features you still had to build. Whereas now we have to be able to provide an impressive experience for both providers and patients. Because for me, that's a really critical element where coming from the clinical side, I think a lot of other services do not have actually a strong integrative functional medicine providers actually lived it, gets it, proved it out. They have an expertise in a certain vertical, but it's a whole other ballgame when you actually want to build a scalable model where otherwise your overhead's going to keep going up. The providers hold a huge burden of responsibility, and you still end up creating a very reductive approach where you're really just mitigating symptoms, but you're not necessarily mitigating the disease progression. So I think in some ways, as hard as this has been, builds our grit. It makes us much more passionate that we can do this, but we do need a community to come together to really be the cheerleaders that are helping us succeed.
Where do you want to be in 6 to 12 months?
In 6 to 12 months, we will have already launched, taken care of, we'll have be running like 3 pilots right now that we're in talks, which allows us to care for at least 100 customers, really been able to scale, not just in California, but also starting to in other states and be revenue generating. And being able to show that all of the metrics are driving the outcomes that we're able to then be on the path where having some key cheerleaders backing it up and collectively, that's what represents Thymos Health. We want to be able to increase access to millions of lives in these underserved regions, create an affordable market where we are changing the dial in how things are going. That's very ambitious. And I think a year from now, I believe we can be on that path, and the data will show for itself what we're able to accomplish. But I think that we will be able to do this very rapidly within the next 6 to 12 months, and then even so in the next few years, where I think that's a changing the dial, which really you don't see that in healthcare. I think that's what makes us, as tough as this is, I think that we could actually be truly profitable like every year, so that hopefully we will be that unicorn.
Yeah, it sounds like you definitely will for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so thank you for your time today. It's been a wonderful conversation. Where can people connect with you after the show?
Well, you can reach me through my email. It's pyle@thymoshealth.com. You can also learn about our company through thymoshealth.com. Also, always follow me on LinkedIn just to learn more, to connect would be great.
So, well, thank you for your time today. And it's been an amazing experience. Thank you.
Thank you.